Levy friends, thank you for your patience. I appreciate it so much. I know Lecia does as well. Technical difficulties seem to be just how it is. If any of you were attending Yom Kippur services over the weekend, you may have experienced technical difficulties there as well. I know I certainly did. Okay, so thank you for joining us. We have a very special lecture today. I'm excited to bring to you Lecia Brooks. I've heard her speak before. She's fantastic, and the information that she'll be talking about is so important. But as you know, we have a couple of very short housekeeping announcements that I want to share with you now. All of you are muted, but your feedback and your questions are very important to me. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Please don't use the raise your hand function because I can't access it and it'll only be frustrating for both of us. We will take questions at the end of Licia's presentation, but send them as you think of them. I want to thank, I want to thank the Levy Senior Center Foundation for sponsoring these lectures. They have been completely generous starting 4 years ago when this was just an idea that we came up with at a board meeting, and since then they have been just rock steady there with financial support and encouragement, and we couldn't do this without them. We also couldn't do it without our generous corporate sponsors at Avidor. And I just have a couple of things that I'd like to share about Avidor. Avidor is a brand new building. It's located in downtown Evanston on Oak Avenue. It's a premier apartment rental building for adults 55 plus. It just opened in June. It features, each unit features extensive amenities, designer finishes, their daily events and activities, which are safely conducted during the pandemic. There's a pool with a sun deck, a fitness club with stainless steel fitness club, and this fitness club doesn't have stainless steel appliances. That would be the kitchens. And there's custom flooring and cabinetry. Their designers have thought of every detail to make your next adventure exceptional. Apartments start at only $18.85. Please call them today to schedule your individual tour. Their number is 847-448-0832. Avidor Evanston, it may be your next home. Okay, another housekeeping announcement we have is it's 100% cotton long sleeve t-shirt weather. You can see I'm wearing it. It's great. It's so comfortable. We have a lot of extra larges and larges. I think there's one medium left. They're only $15. If you're interested in one of these cozy t-shirts, please get in touch with me and I will make sure you get one. And without further ado, I am going to turn the presentation over to Lecia Brooks. She is one of the senior people at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she knows so much about this sordid topic. So it's weird to say it's my pleasure to present her to you. She is an expert in this field, and it's important that we hear it. So, Lecia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for hosting the Southern Poverty Law Center today. It's a really honor. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I completely understand what you mean about It's weird to say so, especially when I'm speaking on the topic of hate and extremism. But we do believe at the Southern Poverty Law Center that it's just critical, and more critical every day that we are made aware and are aware of the threat to our very democracy. So thank you for having me today. If I could ask you, I'm trying to share a screen. Can you allow access?
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that what you need?
Yeah, I think we got it.
Great.
Are you able to see the screen?
I am able to.
The hate map.
Folks in our audience, can you, one or two of you, please let me know, can you see the screen? And can you see me? Because we want to see the screen, but we don't want to see me. Yes, we can see the screen. Great.
It'll just make the participant smaller.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And let me apologize in advance. And yes, we're all familiar and becoming more familiar every day with the beauty and challenges of Zoom. I had a beautiful keynote presentation to share with you today, and I'm unable to put it up. So we have the hate map. But let me walk you through what I want to share with you today. First, for those who don't know, the Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971. We're in Montgomery, Alabama. I'm in Montgomery today, and it's a little bit overcast, but we're happy that the fall weather is here. The center started as a small civil rights law firm and has now grown to over 350 staff in 5 different states across the Deep South. We're located in Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, and we also have a small office in Washington, D.C. Our work has expanded. It still includes civil rights litigation. We've expanded some of the focus of that litigation to include criminal justice reform, children's rights, economic justice, LGBTQ rights, and voting rights, of course. Our program that I'm speaking with you about today is the Intelligence Project. That started in the late 1980s. Started out as Klan Watch, and now we track and monitor all sorts of hate and extremist groups. And then finally, our other project area is teaching tolerance, where we offer free anti-bias curriculum to K-12 educators across the country. It's our hope that we combine these two, teaching tolerance and our work of the Intelligence Project, to really serve as additional advocacy tools in our fight to ensure that we have equal justice and access for all. But Wendy invited me today to talk to you about hate and extremism. And I'm sure that as we're all aware, we're in a moment of racial reckoning in the United States. It's been a real change and a real shift in how we see hate and extremism around us since the awful, horrific murder of George Floyd. And so I take that as an opportunity to, one, pause and acknowledge that we're in this moment, and for some to just really recognize the hurt and the pain that's associated with this moment. And then also to thank and acknowledge those who have opened themselves up and begin to question things and look at things differently and begin to see how others might experience the world differently than you. Would also say that for the groups and the individuals that we track and monitor at the Southern Poverty Law Center, they see this moment as a positive, that it's a time to increase their ranks, a time to capitalize and take advantage of the chaos that they see around them. And I'm here to tell you that the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I'm sure you agree as well, that we are not going to devolve into complete chaos. We are going to reclaim and act in our highest democratic values. Now, the map that I have before you on the screen shows 940 active hate groups in the United States in 2019. The Southern Poverty...
Excuse me, it disappeared from the screen.
Disappeared. Oh my goodness. That's never happened before. Huh. I don't know what that means. Is it back? Yeah, it should be
Yes.
back.
Yes.
Okay. So part of the work of the Intelligence Project is that we conduct an annual census of all the active hate groups that exist in the United States. We're always looking a year back, so this is the map for 2019. We'll have the data for 2020 in January of 2021. So we had 940 active hate groups in the United States in 2019. And that may seem like a lot to some, it may seem like a small amount to others, but I'm here to tell you that 940 active hate groups in the United States is quite a bit. As you can see from the map, there are literally hate groups all across the United States. What I want to bring your attention to and invite you to also, you can also find this information yourself on the website. And I'm going to pull up Illinois, which we showed 26 active hate groups in Illinois in 2019. If you scroll down, you'll be able to see the groups that we identified in 2019. And I just want to take a moment to go through those because you may be interested. Act for America is a group that is found across the United States. They're a pretty ugly anti-Muslim group. You may recall they're the ones that hold rallies across the country and say that Sharia law is about to take place in your city or state, which couldn't be further from the truth. So that's Act for America. You may be more familiar with more traditional hate groups like the American Defense Skinheads. It's a racist skinhead group, and we have noted that they have chapters across the state of Illinois. And pointing out the different ideologies, we have anti-LGBTQ groups. And I want to note here that the Southern Poverty Law Center continues to receive some criticism around why we identify or how we identify anti-LGBT groups. One, let me say that hate crimes that are perpetrated against LGBTQ people or those that are perceived to be LGBTQ actually are some of the most heinous, most violent hate crimes that you could see. I'm sure that you're aware that there's been a tremendous increase in the number of murders and hate crimes committed against transgender individuals, in particular, transgender women of color, black and brown trans women. And it has something to do with the feelings, the animus, the anger that's represented through anti-LGBT feelings that they take it out on the individual. So the Southern Poverty Law Center feels it's our moral obligation to point out that hate directed against anyone because of who they are is dangerous. Let me take this moment to define what we see as a hate group. Any group that has belief or practices that attack or malign an entire group of people based on their immutable characteristics, based on who they are, we identify as a hate group. Groups that find themselves on our hate group list do not have had to commit any crime. It's that they have these beliefs or practices that malign people because of who they are. What's also true amongst these hate groups is that they invite other people to join them in their cause. And that is alarming. The increase in, the average number of hate crimes that take place in the United States on any given year is about 250,000. 250,000 hate crimes or hate incidents that take place annually. We feel that it's important enough for us to call out the groups that we feel add to these numbers, and that's what we're doing here. Let me also point out the American identity movement, because the white nationalist movement, what we noticed in our census for 2019, the white nationalist movement grew by 55% over the last 2 years. This is in no small part due to the contributions from the so-called alt-right, which we began to hear much about the alt-right in 2017 when we had that show of hate and defiance in Charlottesville, Virginia. And you may be familiar with the person, Richard Spencer, who coined the term the alt-right. And they are, make no mistake about it, they're still white nationalists, they're still white supremacists. White nationalists advocate for a white ethno-state. They believe that whites should have their own lay of the land, if you will, and free of people of color. And that is what they're advocating for. In more modern day today with the alt-right, they are advancing a false theory of white genocide. They're using the demographic shifts that we're experiencing in the United States to say that there's a plot or there's a conspiracy against whites to get rid of whites, to make them no longer a numeric majority, when we know the facts show that demographic shifts began, a couple of decades ago. If you were to look back at the census in 2000 and then in 2010, you'll find that demographic shifts began to be more noticeable then. But it was in 2010 when the Census Bureau first predicted that whites would no longer hold a numeric majority that began to animate the fears and the anxiety amongst white nationalists. And so in turn, they began to advance this false conspiracy theory that there was a white genocide. And so this demographic shift has really animated and is responsible for their increase. If we go back a moment too, I should say that there was a 35% increase in the number of anti-LGBT groups from 2018 to 2019. That's why all of these things are important. Let me talk about for a moment why we're seeing this increase in hate and extremist groups. And I alluded to that when I talked about the demographic shifts. And by far, the demographic shifts that we're experiencing are most responsible for what we're now coming to know as white anxiety or anxiety over demographic shifts. It's just a fact. But if we look back, we can kind of put some logic to it. In the 70s, the white population was about 69% white and about 34%, 17% rather, people of color. Today, it's about 83, sorry, got my numbers wrong. Let me get that right. In 1971, so there were about 83% white population and 17% people of color. Then it shifted to about 64% white and 35% people of color. And that kind of shift has really caused some concern. Most people would say that, oh, it's because of immigration. And it's not, that's not the reason. That's one of the reasons. But the primary reason is just kind of natural increase in birth rates that happen in certain populations and don't happen in certain other populations. The white population has about a 15% increase in numbers, any given year, and that's about the same for the Black population. And just, it's also important to note that the African-American population across the United States is about 14 to 16%. And it will remain that way into the foreseeable future. If we could look ahead to maybe 2050 or 2060, when we'll no longer experience a numeric majority amongst any racial or ethnic group, we're able to see that the increases in the Asian and Pacific Islander population, along with the increases in the Latinx population, those groups will move towards holding a greater majority. In white population and Black population will remain at about 15% of the population. So I think it's important to know that. Another thing to think about and remember when we're talking about demographic shifts is that it didn't just occur, as I mentioned before. If you look at the demography across the United States presently, and you look at it by age, you'll see that Americans that are about 55 years old and over, the racial majority is still white, it's about 75%. And then it drops to about 60 to 65% when you take 10 years off of that. So age 35 to 45, say, you're becoming more, there's more of a 50-50 split. But interestingly and telling is that if you look at the population by age, 18 and under, we're already at a 50-50 split between those who identify white and those who identify as people of color. So those kinds of things will continue. We began to see that in our nation's public schools about 5 years ago, where demographers were noting that the children entering kindergarten for the first time were predominantly people of color, and whites were a minority. So the demographic shifts are real for sure, and they have nothing to do with a political conspiracy of any sort. But that's what white nationalists and white supremacists use to animate their message. In addition to, and I'm going to go off of that for just a second, so I'm going to stop the screen just to refocus us. If I could switch a little bit to talk about anti-Semitism, which is another thing that we see in terms of growth, sadly. And I would say that we began to see a real growth in anti-Semitic acts in the United States a couple of decades ago, at least one decade. But the sad truth is that people weren't really paying attention to it. What happens when you track and monitor hate and extremism, we notice and can put together hate incidents and see how they can lead to tremendous violence, like what we saw at the Tree of Life synagogue or in Poway, California. It starts though out with something a lot more, some might think it's innocuous, but I think it's directly hate related. And you may recall that a few years ago, we began to see the desecration of Jewish cemeteries, particularly in the Northeast and in the Midwest. And this going unchecked really allows anti-Semitism to flourish. And so I point this out because I really want to direct our attention to all sorts of anti-Semitic acts and really encourage us to point those out, to name them, and to push back against them. Because when it goes unchecked, they just continue. I would also mention that anti-Semitism actually animates white nationalism. They're intimately connected. White nationalists and true white supremacists who believe in a white supremacist ideology have always connected and are always connected to anti-Semitism. They see the Jewish population as manipulators of the demographic shifts, manipulators of immigration policies, acceptance of cultural trends like LGBTQ acceptance. They always see whenever there's some kind of growth or not growth, but growing acceptance of formerly marginalized groups, white nationalists blame Jews for that. So that's an important thing to note. If Jews are not called out explicitly, they are called out implicitly, at least with true white nationalists. They always blame them. White Jews, including white Jews. Of course, I mentioned that we had that horrendous murder at Tree of Life. We also had it at the synagogue in Poway. And then we had that rash of killings and attacks in New York last year during Hanukkah. And it's important to note that those those atrocities, or at least the one against the rabbi and his home when he was killed, was carried out by Black separatist groups, groups known as call themselves Black Israelites. And I think it's important to note that they pick up on the anti-Semitic tropes that have been advanced by white supremacists and white nationalists for decades. And so that's more evidence of how this poison, when it goes unchecked, other groups pick up on it and act upon it. So I think that it's important to note that as well. Just referring to my notes here. Another thing that I would connect to the growing anti-Semitism is this really it's a quite curious phenomenon of, well, maybe it's not, because it's part and parcel to how society seems to be, or some segments of society seem to be rejecting facts. The ADL put out a report a couple years ago that talked about Holocaust denial, or a lack of awareness and appreciation and understanding or education on the Holocaust. It seems that millennials, about 49%, almost half of millennials were unable to tell you or define what the Holocaust was. 66% were unable to explain what Auschwitz was. And this is not just for millennials, but almost half, or 45% of all Americans, were unable to name one concentration camp. And so this kind of lack of education, this lack of understanding of what has happened and what continues to happen, and this denial of facts leads to an increase in what we see as hate activity. Another thing that the Southern Poverty Law Center is seeing, in addition to the physical hate groups that we track and monitor, the 940 that I mentioned, which I did mention was a slight drop from the year before, we're seeing an increase in online activity. So groups no longer need to meet together physically, they can meet online. And we see this happening domestically and internationally. We see a growing radicalization of young white males as young as 12 and 13. We see an intentional recruitment effort that seeks to bring young white men into their ranks. And it's something that we shouldn't ignore. It starts off with memes. They use memes a lot. They capitalize or take advantage of the kind of gamer culture and show up in game chat rooms and start sharing memes that may mean nothing to the untrained eye, but to them means a lot, and it's the kind of a gateway. And the next thing you know, a young child is down the rabbit hole and reading all about these conspiracy theories. The Southern Poverty Law Center, in collaboration with George Washington University, has recently launched a guide for parents and caregivers called, it's meant to help parents and caregivers recognize the signs of radicalization, recognize the signs that their children have been touched by radicalization, and it offers ways to intervene. So I invite you to go to our website to pull that down. We also have some information on the website that just talks about how to intervene in schools. And this is really more curriculum, supplemental curriculum for teachers to help with radicalization that they may see their students subject to. So that's an important thing to note. You all may be aware of what happened in Portland. Thankfully, this past weekend, there was a big rally by the Proud Boys, which the Southern Poverty Law Center identifies as a hate group. They maintain that they're not a hate group and that they're not racist. We maintain that they're misogynistic, anti-immigrant, and yes, racist. More importantly, they attract white nationalist groups. So thankfully, there was no violence in Portland this past weekend, but they are a growing threat. So this group called the Proud Boys, and I wanted to name them because you have a Proud Boys group in Illinois as well. So when you hear these groups, they call themselves a male chauvinist group, and they would like you to believe that they're out to protect free speech, when in actuality they're advancing a white nationalist agenda, and you should be aware of them. So another, well, the Proud Boys started in 2016, and there's another fairly new group called the Boogaloo Boys, who started just last year. You may have heard more about them because they've been showing up a lot at Black Lives Matter's protests post George Floyd, and they seek to infiltrate themselves into these groups, and they too say that they're not a racist organization, but that they're concerned about government. We haven't identified them as a hate group yet, although we are tracking and monitoring their anti-government activity, and note that they advocate for a civil war. Other groups, white nationalist groups that are known as accelerationist groups, are also advocating for a race war. And so when these different groups come together, be it advocating for a civil war, advocating for a race war, violence is sure to erupt. The president and the Trump administration writ large would have you believe that Antifa, the anti-fascist groups, are responsible for the violence and the anti-government activity. And that's simply not true. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, has pointed out on numerous occasions over the last couple of years that the greatest threat to the US and US security is from the far right and far right extremists who traffic in a hate ideology that's connected to white supremacy. So white supremacists, white nationalists, those who adopt a white supremacist ideology are the greatest threat in terms of domestic terrorism. There are hearings happening on the Hill today that are looking to help advance some legislation or policy priorities with respect to pushing back against domestic terrorist groups. But again, the Trump administration would have you to believe that the threat to domestic terrorism is not white supremacy, and it in fact is. I think that the House sees that, and we'll see what happens as this conversation continues and moves along through the Senate. So that, I really apologize because I'm going back and forth between two devices to make sure that I give you the notes that I wanted to give you. The Southern Poverty Law Center recently launched a podcast called Sounds Like Hate. And I invite you to visit or listen in on that, because one of the things that we were trying to do with this podcast is really help in the effort to demystify and hopefully de-radicalize young people. I want to show you that one. So it's called Sounds Like Hate. And it's narrative storytelling. The first couple of episodes talk about a young woman who became involved in hate group activity because of a boyfriend. She found herself, like, remember I said how easy it is to get, caught in a rabbit hole. And next thing you know, she's deeply involved in hate group activity. She didn't grow up. She grew up in a kind of a racially diverse neighborhood, had a racially diverse group of friends, and, became susceptible to these messages. So it tells her story, and most importantly, tells her story about how she got out. Another couple of episodes talk about what's happening at a high school in Vermont, where students are clashing over whether or not to support Black Lives Matter, and some students are taking issue with a mascot at the school that looks frighteningly like a Ku Klux Klan outfit. So Sounds Like Hate, you can subscribe to it on any place where you get your podcast, or go to our website and listen to that. So we have that. We have Teaching Tolerance offers a number of resources that I made mention of a bit ago. The curriculum that is directly responsive to the radicalization that happens to students, but also there's just a treasure trove of information on anti-bias and anti-racist education. There's information for teachers and educators about Black Lives Matter. What does that mean? Should we support it? How can I support my students? How can I support this movement, this moment? How can I learn more? You'll find that all at tolerance.org, our website. We have resources on how to fight hate in schools, how to speak up against bias and bigotry, and all of our resources are free. So I direct you to our website for more resources. I think I'll stop there and entertain questions.
I'm sorry, are you ready for questions?
Yes,
Yeah?
ma'am.
Okay. Let's see. Let me, hang on one second.
Quite a few.
Pardon me?
Are there 85 questions, really? Looks great.
No, a lot of those were comments when I had asked if they could see you, but let me go into the Q&A function. Hang on one second. Okay. Hang on. Thank you everybody for your patience today. Let's see.
And then I saw that some people weren't able to see the full hate map, so I just scrolled down so they could see the southern states. They didn't see the bottom of it.
Okay. William would like to know, what is your opinion of QAnon?
Thank you so much for that question. It's a dangerous, dangerous threat to our democracy. QAnon falls under what the Southern Poverty Law Center would call anti-government groups. And in addition to our accounting or census of hate groups, we do an accounting or census of what we call anti-government groups. Last year, we identified 576. Now, QAnon is a curious kind of, they're straight up conspiracy theorists. And our definition of anti-government groups is that they buy into kind of extreme anti-government conspiracy theories. The QAnon group really has taken off in their support of the Trump administration. And they buy into the false narrative that there's a plot against President Trump, that there is a plot from the left to take over government, and that President Trump is the protector of the government. And so they in turn feel it's their responsibility to protect him. It's really interesting because it's based on such falsehoods and such ridiculousness that it's hard to fathom why so many believe and buy into it, but they do. You may be following a congressional race in Georgia, which we're following very closely. They border on, white supremacy or racism, and definitely anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ. It's a very dangerous mix of political, nonsensical, anti-government conspiracy theories that has really, really taken off.
Is anybody in charge of it? Is there?
it's kind of a loose, it's a loose association, but it from what we can tell, they just buy into a couple of different theories. Let me see if I can pull something up here on the old QAnon to direct you to. But very, very, very dangerous. I kind of liken them to what do you call it? Make America MAGA people that are running for public office. You can look for the next question while I look for this one. There she is. Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Does she have a good chance of being elected?
Oh yes, she does. She probably most likely will be elected. Yes. And I should say, a lot of the GOP leadership they don't support QAnon at all, and they see them as ridiculous. So you can see here from the opening that her messaging is based on extremist groups' ideology, 3%ers who are an anti-government militia, gun owners, anti-LGBT groups, Alliance Defending Freedom, which is an anti-LGBT group as well. It's interesting. So you can go to our website and read more about her and other QAnons who are trying to make their way into public service. We are about to the Intelligence Project at Southern Poverty Law Center is about to release a report on people who are running for office that we've also connected to these hater extremist groups. So there'll be more details on that.
When do you think that will be released?
Next week.
Great. Mm-hmm. Will we be shocked by anything in it?
You might be surprised.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mike would like to know, has there been a significant rise in hate groups since the Trump presidency?
That's a really interesting question. Where we saw, at least in the last kind of decade or so, the highest rise we saw was during the Obama administration. There was a real high in 2008 after he was first elected. And then we saw it kind of go down over his first term. And then again, over the second term, there was a really huge drop. Now, what we think happened in that time is that they really organized more online and underground because there was not a lot they felt that they could do to influence government. There was an increase at the end of Obama's term before President Trump won election. Now, it went back to kind of a normal kind of high, but typically hate groups fall under a GOP president and increase under a Democratic president. And we've seen this to be true under the Trump administration. And we would say that the agenda of a lot of these hate groups has really been taken up by senior advisors from the Trump administration, and there's not a lot of need for outside advocacy from hate groups. You recall when President Trump was first inaugurated into office, he had Steve Bannon, who as a senior advisor. He also had Sebastian Gorka. Steve Bannon was tied to Breitbart News, and they promoted themselves as the platform for the alt-right and advanced a lot of kind of white nationalist speaking points and alt-right speaking points. And I think we've seen since Steve Bannon left the White House that he has a clear connection to white nationalists. We also saw the same with Sebastian Gorka, who is a senior advisor who has ties to neo-Nazi groups in Hungary. He's no longer there. The white nationalist, well, I shouldn't call him a white nationalist, but the one who seems to identify or repeat white nationalist speaking points the best, who's still in the White House, is Stephen Miller. And he advances this extreme anti-immigrant, xenophobic platform. He was responsible for the Muslim ban. He's responsible for caging families, and he the Southern Poverty Law Center did some extensive reporting on releasing a series of emails that he had with the former Breitbart editor that shows that he visits white nationalist websites all the time and amplifies their messages, as does President Trump, who has on a number of occasions has been known to retweet white nationalist speaking points. So I say all that to say that there's a low in the actual number of hate groups. There's an increase in the white nationalist ideology's influence on the federal government at the federal at the level of the federal government. I'll say that their influence has increased greatly. We have Tony Perkins, who is the president of Family Research Council, who is on our anti-LGBTQ hate list, who has had unfettered access to the White House in the ways that he never had before. FAIR, the Federation for Immigration Reform, also had similar access, and we see this as problematic because it results in policies and positions that we deem as anti-democratic.
Can you talk a little bit about Stephen Miller? Because it's puzzling that, he's Jewish, and you would think that
and he's from California too, and I'm from California. I'm like, he went to Santa Monica High School, which, if anybody knows LA, it was like one of the most liberal high schools ever. I just don't know how he turned out this way. And his relatives will say the same as well. Right,
but the anti-immigrant stances started in high school, and I mean, is he just an aberration? Is it self-hatred? Can you shed any light on it without being a psychiatrist?
Yeah, I think that you hit on something when you noted that it started in high school, and this is the way he developed his identity in opposition to the liberalism around him, right? And so we know that can happen, and that's who he became. I mean, for many, thankfully, we don't hold on to that, or don't kind of seek to prove ourselves in one way in opposition to something else. But this became who he was. He also worked for Jeff Sessions, when Jeff Sessions was senator in Alabama. So that experience certainly reinforced his nativism and his anti-immigrant stance, because around that time, Sessions in Alabama had pushed a real, kind of draconian anti-immigration law, and so his feelings or thoughts on that were reinforced and supported. And so who knew, like, his work with Jeff Sessions would end up propelling him to a senior advisor position in the Trump White House. And that's just what happened. So he is really continued in that vein. And now that he seems to be very proud to be known, as the anti-immigrant guy. I don't know how he lives with himself, but that's what we have.
Another question. There are hate groups all over the world. I'm curious if you have a perspective on whether this brand of hate is more strongly American.
That's a really interesting question as well. The spread of hate globally is also at an all-time high. There have been a couple of really good pieces in the New York Times and I think the Washington Post on what's happening in Germany as far as the revival of white nationalism and anti-Semitism there, and then to kind of, what's happening in Hungary, what's happening all over Europe with respect to the far-right governments and authoritarian regimes kind of pushing forward. They go hand in hand. So it seems like the more populist government and government officials are also the most strongly xenophobic and push back against they call multiculturalism, they've been pushing back against migrants and the like. So what I think is happening, I think that they're maybe a couple years ahead of us And if we don't do something to interrupt what we see as advances in authoritarianism in the US, then we'll be at the same place that they're at today, right? In terms of authoritarian regime. And many people think, oh, you're the US, and democracy can never happen. But we see it happening just a little bit at a time. But with respect to the hate groups and what's going on in Germany, they're doing a lot to uncover the presence of these white supremacists within the elite ranks of their military. And we've been trying, the Southern Poverty Law Center has been trying to get the Armed Services Committee to look at the connections in the military, the presence of white supremacists and dangerous white supremacists in the military. And they've listened a little bit, but not enough, and certainly not doing enough to fully investigate the threat. Over the last couple of years, the Army Times, which is, their paper, they've done a couple of surveys on, the presence of white supremacy and white supremacists within the ranks. And each year it shows that they see it more and more. We've had a couple of high-profile arrests of people who were former military. We can look back on, certainly look back on Oklahoma City bombing, and you see a connection to former military. So what they're noting out loud in Germany, that people white supremacists who hope to advance civil war or race war are joining the military and the elite ranks of the military to get training. And for some reason we can't convince our heads of armed services to look at it in the same way. Though today there's a hearing today on the Hill. So we hope we're gonna keep pushing it, and there are some leaders that are looking at it. So it's all connected. A lot of the hate is connected, as I mentioned earlier, with the recruitment that's happening online. People in the States, or young people in the States, could be being recruited by international actors, because this whole narrative around kind of white genocide is a global kind of movement at this point.
Someone would like to know, why are the American hate groups recruiting young men, especially, and not women? The Middle Eastern groups have recruited both.
It's an interesting question too. More and more
smart
women.
Group here.
Well, yeah. As I mentioned, the woman in the podcast who became a part of the group. What the interesting thing is, it's not interesting really, but these white supremacists also tend to be misogynistic, right? And their thinking is that women are there in a support function. They're not recruited as soldiers, right? A lot of their beliefs are so kind of old school and misogynistic that they don't recruit women. Women, you can come in and help you should get pregnant and have more white babies, right? You should do that. You should take care of and support the white men, and that's where they're at right now.
Okay. Ellen says, I hope Lecia will also discuss how to prevent enrollment into these hate groups, how we can help all feel loved and belonging to community that cares in healthy ways. Then she asks philosophically, why do men hate so much, and how can we help improve their social skills?
Well, that's a great question. And I really believe that it starts with us as individuals, right? That it's our individual responsibility to just show that we reject hate, and more importantly, that we embrace difference. And each of us has to do that in our own little world, in our own little sphere. And that includes calling out hate when we see it, be it from the president, or be it from your pastor, or from wherever you see it. It's important to call it out, because when we don't do that, it's allowed to fester. And what we've noticed during the Trump years, and really It began during the 2016 presidential campaign, where it became okay to dehumanize and humiliate and talk about people. We weren't like that just a year before, but then it became okay, and he won by denigrating people, and he continues to do that, and not enough of us are saying that that's not okay. We've allowed them to become emboldened. We've turned over the narrative, if you will, because we're so polarized. Well, that's just the way they are. That's the way we are, and never the two shall meet. But it's important for us to call it out wherever we see it, whenever we see it. It's also important to vote.
Okay. How are, the question is, how are you supported? I think it means Southern Poverty Law Center. I don't think it's specific to you. Although you can talk about that if you'd like.
The Southern Poverty Law Center is so fortunate to be supported by, individuals like you all across the country. We probably have 250,000 or so individuals who are loyal supporters, who give an average of $100 a year. And because there's so many and they're so loyal, that makes it possible for us to do our work. We do get some family foundation grants sometimes, and some, I will say most recently, since the George Floyd thing, a lot of companies have come to us and want to support our work. But first and foremost, we're supported by individuals across the country.
Good. Is there a similar organization like Southern Poverty Law Center in Europe?
Yes, and forgive me, I always forget the name of it.
Do you know where it's based? Which country?
It's in Germany. It's in Germany.
Great.
And they based it completely on the Southern Poverty Law Center. It hasn't existed that long, but they tried to kind of figure out how they could sue, and this was on the model of how the Southern Poverty Law Center sues hate and extremist groups in civil court, to bankrupt them, and they wanted to follow kind of that in that vein. Unfortunately for them, unfortunately for us, we have laws that allow that, and in some other countries, it's okay, to spew hate, or it is okay to spew hate here, but in Germany they have restrictions on what can be done and what can't be done, so it becomes more of a criminal matter. But yeah, there are groups that do this work. There are more and more groups that are tracking and monitoring these hate groups, and a lot. I've been in a couple of different conferences with groups in Budapest and India, like all over, because everything is happening online, and it's important that we share data with one another so that we can keep up with what's happening. So, yeah.
Denise asks, can you briefly explain the alt-right again, please?
The alt-right, and it was coined by Richard Spencer. And Richard Spencer, to jog your memory, it's this white guy, who, and this happens all the time with them, Richard Spencer came from money. His mother has money, his family had, real estate and cotton farms and all this. So he was living with his mother in Montana. Always
a bad sign if the guy's still living with us.
And he just got, it was like, in my opinion, I don't know if this is true or not, but this was also the time that Milo, I always forget how to pronounce his last name.
Milo, the Greek guy who was arrested.
Yeah, he was really popular. And he had a whole college tour, and he had a shtick and all of this stuff. And so Richard Spencer, I think, was trying to advance this whole, preppy, acceptable white supremacist guy, and he essentially created this whole alt-right thing. Okay, he told them that we have to show up. We have to be intelligent. We have to present ourselves in a certain way. So he developed this whole khaki polo short shirt looking thing and presenting themselves as intelligent. And he started a group that he identifies as a think tank, and they got an office in DC. So he's picking up on, you know, all these trolls and the white supremacists that are happening around him, and he literally carves out a space for himself, because prior to that, there's this guy Matthew Heimbach who started, you know, these white what was it called, traditionalist workers' party group in Maryland, and then he worked more with working class, poor white people, but Richard Spencer wanted to distinguish himself from them. So he carves out this thing, and he just, you know, he got himself on Breitbart, and Breitbart began to amplify their message. He began to say with authority that that people were against white people, and white people should be able to, you know, be proud of who they are, and more importantly, we should have a, you know, kind of separate space for the ethnic groups, and don't need to be polluted. You know, white civilization was responsible for everything that's great in the world, and and essentially people of color are ruining it, and we just need to have this space. So people followed him, you know. His following was probably people, college students and post-college students that had a certain look. And he took this all the way to Richard Spencer is in no small part responsible for the rally in Charlottesville.
Because they all had button-down shirts.
That's right. And the one of the positive consequences of Charlottesville is that it led to his own demise. And he didn't expect it to be violent. It wasn't supposed to be violent. You know, you just saw it as another photo op, and but it turned violent. There are lawsuits against him now. There's civil suits against him now. And he's pretty much, he says, like, you know, he's bankrupt. He doesn't have any money, whatever.
Who came up with the slogans in Charlottesville?
Oh, that was Identity Europa, who came up with "You will not replace us, Jews will not replace us." And they're now known as the American Identity Movement. They've probably had 3 or 4 name changes, but they're strict white nationalists too. You will not replace us, meaning white people. Jews will not replace us. It ties into what I mentioned earlier about the connection between anti-Semitism and white nationalism. And yeah, they're the ones that push the whole false narrative of a white genocide. So yeah, if you look for American Identity Movement now, which I think you might have one. I'm not sure. I have to look again on your map.
Karen asks, are there any books you recommend for further information?
Books tend to be more reflective, right, on kind of what happened, or its analysis of a movement. I would direct you to our website. I would direct you to the ADL. I would direct you to Western State Center. And oh my gosh, ProPublica is doing some really good reporting. Vice is doing some reporting. I just saw a thing on Vice is doing something that Vice TV is starting this week about hate groups. So if you want to know kind of what's happening now, I would direct you there.
Okay. A retired teacher asks, is it possible to get a copy of Teaching of Tolerance?
Oh, of course, yeah. Go to tolerance.org and pull it. We just dropped the fall issue of the magazine. You can sign up there. We'll send it to you.
Great. What can we as individuals do to combat hate groups?
Well, you can know what's in your state. I showed you what's around you, and begin to question that, right? Begin to, if there's one kind of in your area, start advocating or lobbying your elected officials and say, what is this? We don't want a hate group here. I want you to investigate it. Work with local law enforcement. Anytime that a hate group is holding a rally or a demonstration in your area, work with other like-minded people and organizations to host a counter protest, and make it known that you won't abide by hate in your community. Don't turn over the narrative to them. Don't. One of the things we say is like, what's the thing? Apathy is not an option. We have to do something. We have to act, because if you don't, then they think they've got
that's
you.
a decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sharon would like to know, what do you suggest we can say on social media when people say crazy stuff? Does it even bother?
Yeah, I wouldn't get into a debate with people because, some people just live for that. They just live for the debate. Just keep saying, just keep repeating your message and block people. That's what I would do. And when you block people and they're your friends or whatever, they don't know, they're not told. You just don't see it anymore.
Right.
They're not, you don't have to like end the friendship if it's Facebook or something like that, but you can just remove them from your feed so you don't see it. And then they don't know.
Okay, hang on. We have
Someone asked about, can you explain more about Christian identity? And thank you for that question, Jennifer. It's interesting because it's like a misnomer. They're not Christian at all. It's a mix of white supremacy and anti-Semitism, really, disguised as Christianity.
Okay.
So it's not what you're thinking about in terms of a Christian group.
There have been several questions about Antifa.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on them a little bit more?
Yeah, Antifa is short for anti-fascist, and they're political, loosely connected political group or organization. They don't have any direct leadership. They're located in different areas and have different cells, if you will. People often ask, why aren't they on your hate group list? Well, they don't qualify in terms of our hate group definition. They don't have beliefs or practices that denigrate a group of people based on who they are. They fight against political belief, right? And they are true anti-fascists in the purest sense of the word. They feel like it, and I'm not making excuses for them, I'm just saying what they are. In the purest sense of the word, they feel like it's their responsibility to push back whenever they see fascism advancing or the possibility that fascism can advance. They grew out of post-Germany, where it was felt that people didn't stand up soon enough, quickly enough to advancing fascism. So it's a political belief that animates, who they are and what they do. The Southern Poverty Law Center, and I'm not saying that all Antifa engage in violence, but sometimes they do. But we don't support violence from the left or from the right, from anyone. We advance. We believe that nonviolent resistance and nonviolent action is the best and most successful way to create change.
Carol, do you think hate groups were involved in the peaceful protests turning them violent?
Yes, that was, I just quickly went over that when I said the Boogaloo Boys were noted there. And those early protests in Washington, D.C., post-George Floyd, those Black Lives Matter ones, they were there. Yeah, and they were agitating. And it was also seen that like maybe they might break some windows or something like that. And then they tried to blame Antifa, and they tried to start threads on social media that made it look like the posts were from Antifa, but they were really from them.
Bertha would like to know, are there hate groups that have been started by women?
That's a really interesting question.
Whose membership is primarily female?
No. One of Fred Phelps, the Westboro Baptist Church group that has those signs, those awful signs. When the dad died, his daughter took over, and that I think is the only group that I know that is run by a woman that comes to mind. But it does give me an opportunity to talk about a fairly new phenomena, not a new phenomena, but new to our hate list, is that 2 years ago, we started identifying anti-women group and misogynistic groups that engage in violence. And there are a couple of groups on that list. And this is another thing that's also loosely connected to the misogyny, the white supremacy. It's like all connected. So there are a couple of groups that we're really concerned about, and their actual and potential for domestic violence is frightening. It was a few years ago in Santa Barbara, people may recall, when that guy went around the town shooting up the women. I don't know if you remember that. And then there was a shooting in Canada by they call themselves incels.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So they blame women for everything, for their demise. And it's interesting. We just had a convening on the connection between domestic violence and extremism. And it kind of, the movement, if you will, the men's rights movement kind of grew out of family court, where fathers were losing custody of their kids or forced to pay, and felt like women in the courts were responsible for their demise, or young single guys who didn't have a girlfriend. It was, or hadn't, it was women's fault. So some of that, but they show up in the same kind of chat rooms as these white nationalists. So it's like people can branch off into this, men can branch off into whatever their particular thing is.
Please comment on Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast.
Oh, I haven't read it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I haven't read it. I don't have time. I wish I could read.
Joanne would like to know, can you discuss term microaggressions? Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Can you explain it for those of us who don't know?
Yeah, the easiest way to, so there's an aggression, did something that offended me. A microaggression, a good example of it is to say, oh, you're in a group of all white people and there's a black person there, or me, and someone says, oh, wow, you're so articulate, which they wouldn't say today, but usually I try to be. And so it's that, like, you mean it as a compliment, but it's also a dig, because you weren't, in some way, I wasn't expected to be articulate, right? Or
and it may not have been a compliment.
Right. Or someone's an immigrant, like, where are you from? They're not an immigrant, rather, but they're a person of color. Say they're racially ambiguous or whatever. It's those kinds of things. Or to comment on to comment in a way that reveals a lack of understanding or cultural competency. And it's often hard for people to hear that they've committed a microaggression, because I'm the one that feels it, and you don't have to agree that your intent wasn't to be offensive, and you don't have to agree that your intent was offensive or not. It's how it landed on me. And so when we talk about the impact of one's words on the person, as opposed to your intention and whatever it was that you intended to deliver. So everyone, it can slip into microaggressions very, very easily. It could be, wow, I didn't think you were a lesbian, or, whatever it is. And you think, well, what's wrong with that? I just asked, And so that could be viewed as a microaggression. Anything that kind of reminds me of my marginalized status could be viewed as a microaggression. And macroaggressions, which we're just beginning to talk about, are those things that happen in the larger society. And that would be like in the news. Typically in the news, when a crime has been committed and the suspect is black, they'll say black male, dark complexion, whatever. And then if it's not, then it's just not mentioned. The race is not mentioned. Like that. That would be a microaggression.
Are news organizations made aware of this? Do they know that they're doing it?
Yes, yes. And I think, some news, it's such a conglomerate now. They're owned by Sinclair. Like you'd be amazed by how many news stations you think are local are really a part of a larger conglomerate, and pretty much told what they can say or can't say. So they're very little independent news anywhere.
Okay. That's a scary thought.
It's true though. Yeah.
Is your monitoring of these groups through legal cases, or how do you find out about any incidences?
Good question. We have a team of researchers that's all they do every day, probably a dozen of them. They scour police reports, news stories. Some might sign up because they're trying to recruit, and so we could sign up and act like we're interested in being recruited. So that's a tactic. But it's pretty easy to find out what they're doing because they're always actively recruiting, and they're always trying to amplify their message. They talk a lot. Hard to keep a secret.
What does your organization do with the hate group information that you gather annually?
Primarily, it's used for law enforcement. We share it with law enforcement, and we share it with Homeland Security. Increasingly, we try to share it with speakers on the Hill, elected officials, congressional members, and senators and such. But primarily, it's for law enforcement. Then we use it for our own means in terms of trying to shine a light on who these people are. So we have investigative journalists who will do stories about it, like the Stephen Miller thing. We feel it's our responsibility to expose folks through journalism as well.
Are you concerned with sharing the information with Homeland Security that because so many of the departments have become politicized?
Yeah, they don't listen to us anymore. And that we pretty much got kicked out with the Trump administration. One of the first things that he did was to eliminate there was a group that investigated domestic terrorism and white supremacy, and there were like these great programs that were working on de-radicalization, and he defunded all of that and wanted to concentrate more on the threat from foreign jihadists, he said. And FBI folks, who are responsible for mopping all this stuff up and responding to these awful incidents of domestic terrorism in our country, have a very different story to tell. So we're able to get them the information, and they pay attention to the information because the facts are there. There have been more American citizens that have been killed from domestic terrorists than foreign terrorists. That's just the truth. In 2018, the whole year, there were all the American citizens that died as a result of terrorism or domestic terrorism or from terrorism on the right. It's just true. So he can ignore it, but they have to pay attention to it. Then you have those things like, Walmart and, it's terrible.
How would you characterize the relationship between African Americans and Jews at this time? And does it have any impact on the growth of hate groups?
To the first question, and I'll answer it personally. For me, I'd like the relationships to be better. The connections between white nationalism and anti-Semitism just by itself is very important to me. And I do think that the lack of a strong relationship between the two communities feeds anti-Semitism to some segments of the Black population, as we saw in New York with, those terrible killings.
The Hanukkah murders.
Yeah, it was terrible. And I recognize that they're picking up on white supremacist tropes, but then, I also have to acknowledge that Black people did that. So I don't like that. I think that
I'm,
you know,
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't hear.
I was just saying that I don't, even as I acknowledge that the majority of those extremists like Black Israelites pick up their anti-Semitism from other places, I recognize that it's coming from Black people, and that's not good. So one of the things that we're doing, and actually we're having something that starts October 8th, is going to look at the impact of white nationalism on Black communities. And one of the things is to look at how white nationalists use anti-Semitism and Islamophobia or anti-immigrant sentiment and LGBTQ stuff as a wedge to keep us from focusing on, you know, the things that we need to focus on. So there's been a lot that's been done to undermine those relationships, and then there's been a lot that we're responsible for not picking up on. People, Jewish groups that I talk to or folks that I talk to, you know, always lament like, oh, we've got along so well, we're so great during the civil rights movement. Okay, well, so what are we doing now? Like, what can we do now, right? So that's my responsibility, and that's my Jewish friends' responsibilities, to make sure that we're doing something now, which is what I try to do. But all we can do is try to do it. We have to support one another, and stop looking at, and forgive one another, and stop looking at pointing to the, oh, they did this, like like the Nick Cannon and all these people, I think it was some football players, you know, spewed some anti-Semitism, and then it's like, Black people are anti-Semitic. Like, not all Black people. Like, what about the Black people that speak up, you know? And why do you know, we don't do that when white people, we don't do that with Trump at all. And he spews anti-Semitism every day. So, balance.
Okay. Okay, here's an interesting question. As a Jewish person, I no longer classify myself as white, since white supremacists don't. I tend to write Semitic, but do you have a different recommendation? This is for the census and for various organizations asking for demographic identifiers.
No, I think that that's great. Good, you know, good for you. It's the important thing for me is that you identify that you benefit from white skin privilege. I don't care what you put on your census report. I think it's helpful to identify with greater specificity. So I like identifying as Semitic. But again, it's important to acknowledge white skin privilege.
Right.
And that happens for, you know, Latinx people who have white skin privilege. You know, it happens across different groups. It's gonna have to be the last one because I gotta go.
Let me pick a good one. Can you discuss the growth on the militia, and do you consider militia a hate-like group? And can you discuss the extent to which the KKK has grown?
KKK has not grown, and so we'll start there. That every year their numbers go down. They began to fall out of favor years ago. Nobody wants to be associated with a group of people who they still associate with sheets and hoods. So that's out. However, I'll go back to what I said earlier about the white nationalist numbers growing by 55%. That's what's popular. That's where white supremacists are, people who kind of believe in white supremacy. That's where they're going. So I don't want us to think, oh, Klan's gone, white supremacy, hate's gone. That's not true. They pick up on the same tropes, and they're probably smarter about it than the Klan is currently. And they're very similar to what the Klan was like in its heyday, because Klan members were also elected officials, were also police officers, were also, city leaders, and, heads of church, pastors, all that kind of stuff. And so that's what we're seeing within the white nationalist movement. And what was the other part of the question? Forgot.
About the militia?
Oh, militias, very, very concerned about militias. They they are not overtly racist or white supremacists. They are really anti-government. And it's important for people to understand that that anti-government groups and paramilitary groups present a deadly threat to law enforcement and to government officials. And I think people forget that. They're like, oh, they're gun rights, and oh, they're standing up for themselves. These are the same people that participated in that standoff against law enforcement that results in death. These are the same, these people will kill a law enforcement officer at the drop of a hat because they think that law enforcement and government officials are in their way. They don't trust them. They don't want to answer to them. And if people would begin to understand that, and that's the kind of confusion that happens when you have kind of white supremacy as a frame. Oh, they're white guys. They're talking free speech. They're talking Second Amendment. They're whatever. These are threats to our very democracy. And if you don't call them out, and if you continue to allow them to hold rallies with armed to the teeth, it's a mistake. And I would point out that, like, going back to the 60s and now we're seeing a resurgence of Black Panther parties arming themselves. Like, if it's not okay for people of color to arm, it's not okay for white people to arm. Like, either we're against it or we're not.
Are these the people that were taking over the Capitol in Minneapolis or Michigan?
Mm-hmm. Like the you can't make us stay home, no shelter in place thing. Yeah, those people.
They weren't arrested.
No, and they always show up. They always show up armed. And this is the same thing that happened in Kenosha, right? Where people were killed, and these armed militias. Yeah, we can't allow that. We can't allow that to happen.
Okay, I have one final question. Are you optimistic about the future?
I was like, I go in and out. I'll say, I'm encouraged by, as I said when I started, the number of people that are now looking at these issues in new and different ways and challenging old thoughts and how they thought about things and how they saw things, how they see things. I'm encouraged by that. And I don't know if it's going to be enough because there's just so much. I was certainly discouraged by the passing of Justice Ginsburg and the immediate, like, I don't think she was even dead an hour before, McConnell puts out his thing. And so that's discouraging. And yeah, I don't know. Well, it's up to us. I do know that we have the numbers. And when I say we, I mean people who believe in our democracy, who want to advance democracy, who believe that we can do better. We have the numbers. It's just a matter of if we show up or not. And I question people over voting against their own best interest and being fooled by being deceived, allowing themselves to be deceived by something. So that concerns me. But we can do it. We can.
And hopefully
but
we will.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Lecia, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We enjoyed this. Folks, I did not have time to get out a survey to you. I will send that in the follow-up email. And if you could be so kind and to reply, that would be terrific. Lecia, thank you so much again. I appreciate it very much.
And thanks everyone for your patience through the technical difficulties. It was a pleasure. Bye,
okay.
Wendy.
Great. Good luck.